So you're living the innovator's values, and hopefully, even by now, you've found or have decided to find somebody that's going to help you be an integrator, and you should do the same for them. That's fair, right? But we're all going to live in the Gator Parade. You'll notice behind me, there's starting to be quite the Gator Parade. And you all know what that Gator Parade looks like. We are in it every day, right? We know, for instance, that which headline are you most likely to pay attention to, right? The one that hooks your fear or the one that hooks your love, right? The headline on the news media that says, terrible kids did terrible thing to elderly woman, you'll turn your eye to that more rapidly than you would wonderful kids did nice thing for old lady. Right? It's like the Gator brain goes, oh, wait, look out. There might be a danger for you in the first instance, right? And so you better watch out for danger. That's more important. Well, there's another hack that we can use as human beings mentally to help us, kind of manage the Gator Parade. The Gator Parade ain't going away. It's going to be there both in us and around us. Hopefully we can start to override that balance by increasing the number of integrators around us, living the innovator's values, following point, doing praise first, and decreasing the amount of Gator brain, Gator brain slavery, to the Gator. But we don't have to stay that way if we don't want to. Here's a trick. From now on, and this is the simplest of all of the creativity tricks, if you will, and that's to separate the kind of thinking that generates options from the kind of thinking that chooses amongst the options. Separating the kind of thinking that just free forms and freewheels around all the possibility from the kind of thinking that says there's a limited number of possibilities. The type of thinking that here's everything I could do to the type of thinking that says here's what I will do, right? That's what we would call in the creativity practice divergent thinking versus convergent thinking. In writing, it's called the writer's mind versus the editor's mind. You generate a bunch of options and you select amongst those options. And you'll notice I'm not saying ideas, am I? Yet, really. I'm saying options. A lot of people think that, at least in business and education and those kinds of creative spaces, that you want ideas. Well, that's one way to think about it. I want to stretch your thinking here a little bit. Have you ever solved the wrong problem, and not fixed the right thing and realized too late in the game that you put all of your energy or all of your budget into solving the wrong problem? That's because you didn't do a good job of diverging about what's the real problem. That's finding a problem. It's not finding an idea. It's trying to figure out what's the problem we really need to solve, right? Think about some of the more intractable problems that we continuously deal with as a society. We deal with violence, one person against another. We deal with hate, one person against another. We deal with war, one nation or one subset of a nation against another. We deal with prejudice, one people against another, right? We deal with these things over and over again. We may have ameliorated them somewhat, decreased them somewhat, but they're perennial, right? They don't seem to go away. I would submit that we haven't solved the right problem, and we want to look at what's the right problem to solve. And people argue right there as well. So here's the real trick. From now on, we're going to work to separate our divergent thinking, the generation of multiple options, from our convergent thinking, the choosing amongst those options. Now, you may have heard of the term brainstorming, and this is one of those words that's misused constantly because it's not really utilized by folks that have been heavily trained in how you brainstorm. In face-to-face trainings where we actually get to do a bunch of brainstorming together, I'll say to my students, or I'll say to the group that I'm training prior to solving a problem in a meeting, I'll say, how many of you have brainstormed? Then the hands go up, right? I'm sure if I asked you, your hand would go up too. And then I say, I bet you haven't. And they look at me and they go, what? And then I show them how to really brainstorm. And I ask afterwards, now that you've really learned how to do it, how many of you would agree with me that you've never really brainstormed? And 90% of the hands still go up. A few have really learned to do it well. So brainstorming follows 4 primary guidelines that were articulated by Alex Osborne, the guy that coined the term in modern use. Back in the 1850s, where I live in the Adirondack Park, there was a form of brainstorm that was siding, where they left the live edge on the boards. But until the 1950s, it was only meant in that way. 1950s, Osborne articulates this. And it's really, you're going to do four things. First one, and you kind of get a sense of this, it's starting to pervade what we're talking about. And that is when you're making a list, you're going to defer judgment. Core language there, very careful language. Defer judgment, not judge. Your gator brain won't let you not judge. It's going to insist that you do eventually. And heck, if you don't judge, that's a quick way to get dead. So you need to make sure that you have discernment and you judge or are critical at some point, but not yet, right? So you're deferring judgment while you're making your list of options. Then your second guideline is to strive for quantity. We worship when we're divergently thinking at the altar of quantity. The more quantity you get, the more likely you are to get a good outcome. You're going to get a lot of junk, but you're going to converge later. So let the junk be there. Well, why waste the time with the junk? Trust me. Your brain will make more novel connections if you're willing to let it freewheel and make junky connections too. And say them out loud, because your junky connection might be a useful connection for somebody else. The next one is that you're going to seek wild and unusual ideas. You start to run out of wild and unusual options, I should have said. It's a bad habit, this idea thing. And so when you're generating this list, if you seek wild and unusual options, you're more likely to be successful. And then the final one is to build on options. So I'll give you an example real quick. I'm working with Boston Beer years ago when they were still a smaller company. And I was sitting and working with their owner and the marketing department and some other good thinkers at Boston Beer, which you might know of as the brand Sam Adams. And the question was, what's the best way to get more people to drink our beer, right? So that we could sell more. That's their business model. And we're brainstorming and we've got a lot of stuff out there. And then one guy who was a very polymathic guy, Tom Tominac, he was interested and curious about a lot of things. A wild idea popped into his mind, a novel thought. He had the courage to say it because he cared. He was passionate about the brand. And he said, let's sell more beer by getting people to drink it slower. Now that sounds like a contradiction, right? But he said it anyway, and it went down on the list. When we were converging, my memory is the owner picked it. It might have been the marketing VP, but Tom didn't pick it. He thought it was a little too crazy. That concept got picked and brought forward. Let's sell beer by getting people to drink it more slowly. And what grew out of that was this whole sense of really tasting and paying attention. People don't chug-a-lug a good wine, right? People don't chug-a-lug a good whiskey. They savor it. Let's get people to do that with our beer. There you go. And that's how they grew their business. And in the United States, at least, Sam Adams gets credit for initiating some of the activity that ended up growing into this huge growth in microbrews that are really all about the taste. And I would root cause that back to Tom Tominac's willing to be humble, curious, tenacious, and when he's divergently thinking, say out loud a wild and unusual idea. And then when we were convergently thinking, some of the senior leadership saying, there's something there, I'd like to explore that a little bit. That's the power of separating divergent thinking from convergent thinking well.